Hey guys, we're going to wrap up your unit on the 1920s and the Great Depression. With this video lesson, we're going to talk about what life was like during the New Deal, how life was developing throughout the 1930s, at least from 32 to probably early 1940. And we're also going to do a little analysis of the New Deal. We're going to talk about its impacts on society as a whole, its effectiveness, and kind of discuss those types of issues. So obviously both of these things, Great Depression and the New Deal that resulted, are going to have huge impacts on American society. For women, especially in a political sense, it's a big change. Roosevelt promoted and recognized many women in his administration. Frances Perkins became the first woman to head an executive office when she was named Secretary of Labor. Ruth Bryan Owen was named the minister or ambassador to Denmark. Roosevelt also appointed women to posts such as the director of the U.S. Mint and the assistant secretary of the Treasury, and women served in leaders in several different New Deal agencies. However, in society as a whole, women still faced the same kind of discrimination and challenges that they had ever since there's been women. Lower wages, less opportunity. Many faced hostility in the workplace because they were often seen to be taking jobs from men. This is an issue that women continue to face during this era. Gains for African Americans are less tangible. Roosevelt is much less progressive on issues of race than he was in issues of gender. However, now Eleanor Roosevelt, however, was much more progressive than FDR was in areas of race, and she often tried to push him to be more progressive and practice more progressive policies. However, his administration did appoint many African Americans. William Hastie became the first black federal judge during this time. He did have an informal group of advisors that were hired to fill government posts that were often known as the Black Cabinet. And they were unofficial advisors. They were not cabinet members. But the Black Cabinet met under the leadership of renowned African-American educator Mary McLeod Bethune. She was also the director of Negro Affairs in the National Youth Administration. Still, as women, and even more so, African Americans continued to face tremendous hardships during the 1930s. Discrimination was severe. Thousands of black sharecroppers and tenant farmers were not helped at all by New Deal programs, and in many cases were shut out of New Deal benefits intentionally. Southern Democrats in Congress often opposed efforts to aid African Americans, and Roosevelt, being a pragmatist, understood that he needed support of Southern members of Congress to enact his New Deal program. So too often he was willing to acquiesce and go along with their demands to keep blacks in a subservient position. However, the New Deal does signal a shifting tide in the electoral math that still exists today. It is during the 1930s that African Americans begin to leave the Republican Party and go in droves and join in droves into the Democratic Party. And we've talked about in the past how the parties kind of shift their allegiances and their positions and their ideologies over time. And this shift really begins in earnest during the 1930s, during the New Deal, when the Democratic Party becomes much more liberal, much more government-oriented, and the Republican Party becomes much more conservative in that manner. Art of the Great Depression was really one of the bright spots of the Depression. This was a time of really an explosion of art and literature in American society. Painters and sculptors did works depicting the struggles of the working class, oftentimes paid by the federal government as part of the efforts to improve lives during the Depression. Authors and playwrights also focused on the plight of the rural and urban poor. You had John Steinbeck, who wrote Grapes of Wrath, which you guys may have read in your English classes. Songwriter Woody Guthrie, the guy responsible for This Land Is Your Land, This Land Is My Land. He writes music and performs throughout the country, celebrating the lives of ordinary people and the working class. Writer James Agee wrote Let Us Now Praise Famous Men, another working class anthem. Photographers really kind of developed during this period. As the technology developed, so did the artists that used the technology. Dorothea Lange recorded images of jobless people and the rural poor. She produces some of the quintessential pieces of art from the Depression. You guys have doubtlessly seen those pictures, whether you know it or not. And we'll look at some of those in class. Walker Evans likewise depicts the lives of the obscenely poor sharecroppers in the lower South. Probably the more famous is Dorothea Lange, obviously. She recorded images of jobless people in her hometown in San Francisco. And she was eventually hired by the Farm Security Administration and basically sent throughout the country to take photos documenting the problems of the rural poor and to help gain support for New Deal programs. It did help raise awareness. In 1937, federal government finally began to provide help for sharecroppers and tenant farmers as well. So the poorest of the poor that oftentimes have been shut out began to get some help. Of course, not African Americans, but others. Anyway, entertainment was still big during the Great Depression. People were looking for anything to escape from the drudgery of their reality. So millions of Americans were still going to the movies each week. And most of these movies were upbeat. They allowed viewers to escape from the Depression. This is when you see the development of what is known as the screwball comedy. Very fast-paced, talking repartee between usually a male and a female lead. Musicals were very popular as well, and also animation and color photography began to be developed during this time. And movies were more than just movies. You know, it could be a whole family entertainment. Usually before the movie you had newsreels, and then like a short cartoon for the children, and then you had the feature that the adults would watch. And so it was a full entertainment experience. Radio also developed during this time. Politics, religion, music, sports, other forms of entertainment was something that radio produced, and it also introduces the new American music of jazz. Also, the first shows are radio shows. Lone Ranger, Fibber McGee and Molly. You had all sorts of different shows, and these shows would be sponsored by companies and corporations. Of course, sports were one of the big ones. It remained strong in the 1930s. Baseball was the most popular, and boxing was not far behind. Of course, Babe Ruth, Joe DiMaggio, Lou Gehrig, all were popular figures during the time. Of course, Joe Louis was the boxing champion of the time that was considered, and still by many considered, the greatest fighter of all time. So lots of changes in culture and society during this time. And as we look at the New Deal, we try to measure the impact of the New Deal. We have to look at the goals versus the results. The New Deal promised relief, recovery, and reform. And the relief programs did put billions of dollars into the pockets of the poor. However, it was less successful in delivering recovery. It took a long time to dig out, and there were fits and starts, and some things worked, some things didn't, and so it was a process. The reforms, however, were successful and long-lasting. Many are with us today. FDIC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, those types of things that try to mitigate the damage of economic downturn still exist now. Also, the New Deal drastically changed the link between the American people and their government. Roosevelt believed the government could help business and individuals achieve greater levels of economic security and kind of stop the boom and bust cycles that the economy had gone through and provide a more even progression for the economy. But it did require much bigger government. And for the first time, Americans began to look to and expect the government to help in times of economic crisis. So from a relief standpoint, millions enjoyed some form of help. Direct relief or jobs provided steady paychecks for people. And of course, programs such as Social Security and unemployment are so successful that they became a fixture of government that are with us still today. Recovery was not as successful. Unemployment remained relatively high, although the New Deal did help drastically cut the level of unemployment. It still does remain relatively high at the end of the decade. Some critics also argued that Roosevelt needed support of big business and he didn't court them enough. Others said the New Deal was not effective. Keynes would have believed this, that the New Deal was not as effective as it could have been because it wasn't enough, that there should have been more. But the reforms were extremely successful and long-lasting. The FDIC restored public confidence in the nation's banks, and we don't have bank runs anymore. The SEC restored public confidence in stock markets, although you can argue about how well the SEC regulates the stock market today. It certainly does try to get rid of some of the worst abuses. Also, roadways, bridges, dams, public buildings, works of arts that still exist today were often built during the New Deal. However, there were limits. Relief programs gave aids to millions, but they weren't meant to be permanent solutions. And there was no way the government could provide jobs to everyone who needed one. Also, the level of government assistance varied by state. So, a family in Massachusetts might receive $60 a month, whereas somebody in Arkansas only got $8. So, there were wide differences in the amount of relief to certain people. They also permitted discrimination against African Americans, Hispanic Americans, women, and other groups that needed help, in many cases worse than the general population. So certainly in that way, the impacts of the New Deal were limited. And had they been expanded, then perhaps the effect on unemployment might have been greater. It's hard to know for sure what the impacts would have been, but certainly it would have helped more Americans. So the New Deal, basically by 1938, is over. Setback, the court packing fight, and the 1937 economic downturn kind of robs Roosevelt of a lot of his political authority, and Congress becomes more and more what's the word I'm looking for? More and more obstinate and unwilling to enact these big programs, and only one piece of legislation, New Deal legislation, passed in 1938, and that is the Fair Labor Standards Act, which did set up the minimum wage, the first, which is a huge step that, of course, we still discuss and debate today. So in 1938, Roosevelt tried to influence voters in the South during the congressional elections. However, his candidates lost and the Republicans make more gains in both the Senate and the House of Representatives. So as a result, he lacked the congressional support that he needed to pass more New Deal laws. So again, when 1939 rolls around, the New Deal, for all intents and purposes, is over. However, there's a new conflict, a new specter arising on the horizon, and that is World War I. As Hitler becomes more and more aggressive, more Americans look at Europe apprehensively, wondering if and when the United States is going to be pulled into that conflict. So that begins to kind of take some of the political attention away from relief, recovery, and reform and towards possible war. So as you get into the next portion of U.S. history, you guys are going to be starting off talking about World War II and how, of course, it's going to reshape American society. So this is going to be your last video lesson for this portion of U.S. history. It's been a fun ride. I look forward to seeing a bunch of you next trimester, and hopefully we can get back at this thing and have a good time with it. Talk to you guys later. Bye.